Most people live inside one's skin. They walk into a room, and the room is just a room. The people in it are just people. The sadness of a stranger stays with the stranger. The tension between two colleagues stays between those two colleagues. There's a clean line, invisible but real, that tells them where the world ends and where they begin. You never had that line. You were born with a dial turned all the way up, and no one ever showed you where the switch was. Other people's feelings didn't arrive as information you could choose to notice. They arrived as your own weather. Their anger became your stomach. Their grief became your fatigue. Their unspoken disappointment became a heaviness you carried home and couldn't explain to anyone. Carl Jung had a phrase for this state, though he didn't invent it for empaths specifically. He called it participation mystique, a condition where a person cannot fully distinguish themselves from the people and the world around them, where the boundary between self and other has never properly formed, so you're living in a kind of psychic soup, absorbing everything, drowning in a life that is only partly your own. Jung saw this as an early, unconscious stage of the psyche. For most people, it fades in childhood. For you, it became a way of life. And here's what almost no one tells you. Being an empath is not one fixed experience. It's a journey that moves through distinct phases, and each phase feels so completely different from the last that you can look back at who you used to be and barely recognize them. Jung understood that the psyche develops in stages, that we're meant to grow through our conditions rather than stay stuck inside them. The empath's life follows this arc with a precision that's almost eerie once you see it laid out. Today I want to walk you through the three phases every empath moves through: the merge, the collapse, and the return. I'll show you what happens in each one, why the second phase is by far the most brutal, the one that breaks so many people that they never reach the third, and why the pain of that middle phase isn't a sign that something's gone wrong with you. It's the sign that something is finally, painfully going right. Because if you're standing in the wreckage of phase 2 right now, feeling like you've lost yourself and lost everyone else at the same time, there's something Jung understood about this exact moment that could change how you survive it. Let's begin where it always begins. Before you knew you were an empath, you thought you were just a person. That's the strange thing about the first phase. It's completely invisible to the one living inside it. You don't know the dial is turned up because you've never known it any other way. You assume everyone feels what you feel. You assume the whole world is walking around soaked in everyone else's emotions because that's simply what being alive feels like to you. Jung would recognize this immediately as the condition of the undifferentiated psyche. In the beginning, there is no clear I. The infant doesn't experience itself as separate from the mother, from the environment, from the flood of sensation pouring in. Consciousness has to slowly carve out an ego, a center, a sense of this is me and that is not me. For most children, that carving happens naturally through the ordinary bumps of growing up. But the empath child often has a reason to keep the walls down. The merge, for you, wasn't just a developmental leftover, it was a survival strategy. Think about a child who grew up with a parent whose moods ran the household like weather systems. A father whose silence at the dinner table could mean anything from a hard day at work to a rage that would erupt by nightfall. A mother whose depression pulled all the air out of a room, so that a 9-year-old learned to monitor the exact tone of her voice, the exact weight of her footsteps on the stairs, to know which version of her was coming home. That child didn't develop hyper-attunement as a gift. They developed it as radar. When your safety depends on predicting another person's emotional state before it fully arrives, you learn to feel them coming the way animals feel a storm before the sky changes. You turn the dial up as far as it will go, and you rip the knob off. Because turning it down even for a moment could mean missing the one signal that keeps you safe. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. For the merged empath, every meeting is a chemical reaction with no protective barrier. You don't just contact other people, you dissolve into them. You become the substance you touch. And here's the tragedy hidden inside phase 1. You learn to experience this dissolving as love. You confuse merging with intimacy. When you feel someone else's pain as your own, you call that caring. When you drop everything to fix someone's mood because their mood has become physically unbearable inside your own body, you call that generosity. When you can't be at peace until everyone in the room is at peace, you call that being a good person. But look closer at what's actually happening. You're not soothing the other person for their sake. You're soothing them because their distress has become your distress, and you cannot tolerate your own nervous system 1 second longer. The helping is real, but it's tangled with something else, a desperate need to turn down the volume that's screaming inside you. You've mistaken the relief of ending your own discomfort for the joy of giving. This is the shadow side of the merge, and Jung would have wanted you to see it clearly, not to shame you, but because you can't outgrow what you refuse to look at. The merged empath is often deeply, secretly controlling, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. If your inner state depends entirely on everyone around you being okay, then you have an enormous stake in managing everyone around you. You become the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who senses the argument before it happens and heads it off. You tell yourself you're doing it for them. Part of you is doing it so you can breathe. In phase 1, you have no self to speak of. Ask a merged empath what they want for dinner, and they'll ask what you want. Ask them what movie they'd like to see, and they'll scan your face for clues about what you'd prefer, and then genuinely believe they wanted that all along. This isn't politeness. The self that would generate a preference has never been allowed to form. There's no solid center in there, just a mirror turned outward, reflecting everyone else back to them. And people love a mirror. That's the seductive part. In phase 1, you're often surrounded by people who adore you, and it feels like connection, like you're deeply loved. You're the friend everyone calls when they're falling apart. You're the partner who anticipates needs before they're spoken. You're the one who always understands, always accommodates, always makes room. You feel needed, and you've learned to survive on being needed the way a plant survives on light. But underneath the busyness of caring for everyone, there's a loneliness that phase 1 empaths can't name yet. Because to be truly known, you first have to exist as a distinct person, and you don't, not yet. People aren't in relationship with you. They're in relationship with their own reflection, which you provide so skillfully that neither of you notices the difference. You can be the most beloved person in your entire circle and still go to bed at night with a hollowness you don't have words for, a sense that no one in the world actually knows what it's like to be you, because you don't know either. Jung called this out with brutal accuracy when he said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." The phase 1 empath is surrounded and starving. They have everyone. They have no one. And the reason they can't communicate what's important to them is that they've never been allowed to discover what that is. The merge can last for decades. Some people live their entire lives here and never move past it. They stay the eternal caretaker, the one who exists only in service, and they call it their nature, their calling, their spiritual gift. And in a sense, it is a gift. The capacity for deep attunement is real and precious. But when that capacity has no owner, when there's no sovereign self choosing how and when to use it, it's less a gift than a possession. Something is living your life, and it isn't you. So how does anyone leave phase 1? Almost never by choice. The merge is too rewarding, too woven into your identity, too reinforced by everyone who benefits from it. You don't wake up one morning and decide to stop dissolving into others. Something has to break the spell, and the breaking of that spell is the beginning of the worst chapter of an empath's life. There comes a moment, and if you've lived it, you know exactly the moment I mean, when the whole system fails. Sometimes it arrives as burnout so total that you physically cannot get out of bed to take care of one more person. Sometimes it's a betrayal, when someone you poured yourself into for years reveals they never saw you at all, that you were furniture to them, useful and invisible. Sometimes it's a single quiet evening when you realize you have absolutely no idea what you actually want from your one life, and the not knowing opens up beneath you like a hole in the floor. However it arrives, the effect is the same. The dial that was stuck on maximum starts to short circuit. The merge stops working. And an empath in the early days of the collapse feels, quite literally, like they are losing their mind. Jung knew this territory intimately, and not just as an observer. Between 1913 and roughly 1917, he went through his own descent into the unconscious so destabilizing that he feared for his sanity. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious, and he emerged from it with the foundation of everything he'd later teach. He understood from the inside that there are collapses that look like breakdowns and are actually breakthroughs wearing a terrifying mask. The empath's phase 2 is exactly this kind of collapse. Here's what happens psychologically. For your entire life, your energy has flowed outward, monitoring, absorbing, managing everyone else. In phase 2, that flow reverses. The energy that used to pour into the world gets violently withdrawn, and for the first time, it turns back toward you, toward the empty center where a self was supposed to be. And what you find there, when you finally look, is disorienting. There's very little that's clearly you. There are decades of other people's needs, other people's emotions, other people's expectations, all of which you've been carrying as though they were your own. The first stage of the collapse is often a strange, frightening numbness. After a lifetime of feeling everything, you suddenly feel nothing. The empath who used to cry at commercials sits through genuine tragedy stone-faced. The one who could sense a friend's mood through a text message now can't tell what they themselves are feeling, let alone anyone else. People around you notice. They tell you you've changed, you've gotten cold, you're not yourself. And they're right that you're not yourself, but they have it backwards. You were never yourself before. The numbness isn't the loss of your true nature. It's the circuit breaker finally tripping after decades of overload. Your psyche has pulled the plug on the merge because the merge was killing you, and it doesn't yet know how to run on anything else. This numbness is one of the most misunderstood experiences in the empath's journey. The people who loved the merged version of you experience your withdrawal as abandonment. And in the language of the old system, it is. You've stopped providing the mirror. You've stopped absorbing their moods and managing their comfort. You've stopped being available in the total, boundaryless way you used to be. From the outside, it can look like you've become selfish, distant, even cruel. From the inside, you're barely holding on. This is where the second phase gets its teeth, because the collapse isn't just internal. It detonates every relationship that was built on the merge. And here's the part that Jung would insist you look at squarely, even though it's the part that hurts most. Many of your relationships were built on the merge. That's the uncomfortable mirror of phase 2. You want to believe that everyone who loved the caretaker version of you loved you. But as you stop performing, as you stop dissolving into people's needs, some of them fall away. Not all, but some. And their leaving tells you something you didn't want to know, that the connection was never really about you. It was about what you did, what you absorbed, what you provided. When the supply stopped, the relationship had nothing left to stand on, because there was never a whole person underneath it that they were connected to. That recognition is devastating in a specific way. It's not the ordinary pain of a relationship ending. It's the vertigo of realizing that the intimacy you counted on your whole life may have been, in some cases, a transaction you didn't know you were running. You gave the merge, they received it, and when you stopped, they left. Jung would call this the withdrawal of projections. The moment you stop being the screen onto which everyone plays their own movie, and you find out how many people were only ever watching the movie. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is where the collapse can curdle into bitterness. Some empaths get stuck in phase 2 by turning it into a story about betrayal. The story where everyone used them, and they were the pure-hearted victim of a world full of takers. That story feels true, and it contains real truth. But Jung would push you past it, gently and firmly, because staying there keeps you trapped. The harder truth is that you participated. You offered the merge because it kept you safe. You needed to be needed. You chose people, again and again, who required a great deal of caretaking, because caretaking was the only language of love you knew, and their neediness gave you a role, a purpose, a way to matter. Nobody did this to you against your will. You were an unconscious partner in the arrangement. Jung wrote that there is no coming to consciousness without pain, and phase 2 is the pain of consciousness arriving all at once. You're becoming conscious of patterns you ran blindly for 30 or 40 or 50 years. You're seeing your own hand in your own suffering, and that seeing is agonizing precisely because it can't be unseen. Once you know that your endless giving had a hook in it, that your selflessness was partly a strategy, you can never go back to the innocent version of yourself who thought they were simply good. This is the great loneliness of the collapse. In phase 1, you were lonely because no one knew you. In phase 2, you're lonely because you're between selves. The old self, the merged caretaker, is dying, and you can feel it dying. But the new self, the sovereign one, hasn't been born yet. You're standing in the gap between them with nothing to hold on to. You can't go back to the merge. You've seen too much, and it makes you sick now. And you can't go forward because you have no idea what forward even looks like. Jung described this exact place as the point where the old orientation to life has collapsed and the new one hasn't formed. He considered it the most dangerous and the most fertile moment in the whole process of psychological transformation. Dangerous because the emptiness is so unbearable that most people flee it. Fertile because it's the only ground from which something genuinely new can grow. And most people do flee. That's why so few empaths ever reach the third phase. The gap is too painful, so they run back toward the merge. They find a new person to dissolve into. They pick up a new cause to caretake. They rebuild the old self out of whatever wreckage they can find, because being the merged caretaker, exhausting as it was, at least had a shape. At least it told them who they were. The formlessness of the gap feels like death, and they'll do almost anything to make it stop, including recreating the exact prison they just escaped. There's another way empaths flee phase 2, and it's more insidious because it looks like growth. They swing violently in the opposite direction. Having discovered they had no boundaries, they build walls a foot thick. Having realized they'd been giving too much, they cut everyone off. They announce that they're protecting their energy, and they retreat into a hard, defended isolation where no one can reach them. They mistake the numbness for enlightenment. They call their armor boundaries, and their bitterness discernment. But Jung would recognize this as a false resolution. The wall builder hasn't developed a self. They've just replaced the merge with its opposite. Where they used to have no line between themselves and others, now they have a wall. And a wall is just as unconscious, just as reactive, just as far from real sovereignty as the merge ever was. The person who can only relate through walls is as controlled by their wound as the person who can only relate through merging. The dial is now stuck on 0 instead of maximum, but they still can't touch the knob. If you're in phase 2 right now, I need you to hear this carefully, because it's the thing that could keep you alive through it. The numbness is temporary. The emptiness is not a verdict on your worth. The relationships falling away are clearing space you didn't know you needed. And the fact that you cannot go back to who you were is not the tragedy it feels like. It's the entire point. The reason phase 2 hurts more than anything you've ever felt is that it's the death of a false self you were completely fused with. When something you're identified with dies, it feels like you're dying, because you can't yet tell the difference between the you that's disappearing and the you that will remain. But there is a you that will remain. There's a witness in you reading these very experiences, recognizing them, still present through all of it. That witness is the seed of the sovereign self. It's been there the whole time, underneath the merge, waiting for the collapse to clear enough space for it to finally breathe. If you're sitting inside this exact gap, too changed to return to the old life, too raw and formless to see the new one, this is the precise moment when a little structure can be the difference between drowning and finding your footing. That's the whole reason we put together a guide called True Self-Discovery. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's understanding of exactly this passage, built not to rush you out of the gap, but to help you stand in it without losing yourself. If any part of what I've described sounds like where you are right now, it might be the companion you need for this stretch of the road. You'll find it linked below. Now let me show you what waits on the other side of the collapse, if you can survive the crossing. Because the third phase is unlike anything the merged empath could have imagined. There's a specific quality to the empath who has crossed all the way through phase 2 and come out the other side. And once you learn to recognize it, you can feel it in a person within minutes of meeting them. It isn't the wide-open, boundaryless warmth of the merge, and it isn't the cold, defended distance of the wall builder. It's something else entirely, a warmth with a spine in it, a softness that can say no, a depth of feeling that is finally, at long last, under the person's own command. Jung called the destination of this whole process individuation, becoming the specific, indivisible person you actually are, rather than the composite of everyone else's needs and expectations that you were assembled from. For the empath, individuation means something very particular. It means you finally get your hand back on the dial. Remember the dial. In phase 1, it was jammed on maximum, and you drowned in everyone's feelings, mistaking the flood for love. In phase 2, the circuit blew and the dial went to 0, and you went numb, and it felt like losing your soul. In phase 3, for the first time in your entire life, you can turn it. Up when you choose, down when you choose. You can walk into a difficult room and decide how much of it to let in. You can sit with a suffering friend and feel them fully, and then leave, and not carry their suffering home in your body like a stone in your gut. That capacity sounds almost mundane when I describe it, but to an empath who spent decades unable to distinguish their own emotions from the emotional atmosphere around them, it's nothing short of a resurrection. You finally have a home inside yourself. There's a you in there now, a center that stays put no matter what's happening in the room, and that center is the thing that gets to decide. The great gift of phase 3 is that your empathy stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you do. The attunement is still there, it never left. But now there's a person operating it. You feel the sadness of the stranger on the train, and you have a choice. You can send them a quiet moment of compassion, or you can gently keep your attention on your own life. And either choice is fine, because you're not compelled anymore. The compulsion is gone. What remains is the pure capacity, freed from the wound that used to drive it. Here's something that surprises the newly returned empath. Your relationships get simpler and they get deeper, both at once. Simpler because you stop doing the exhausting emotional labor of managing everyone. You say what you mean. You state what you need. You let people have their own feelings without rushing in to fix them. And you discover that most people are far more capable of handling their own lives than the merged version of you ever allowed them to be. You stop treating everyone like they'll shatter, which, though you never saw it this way, was subtly condescending, a way of keeping people slightly helpless so they'd keep needing you. And deeper, because now when someone connects with you, they're connecting with an actual person. There's finally something solid there to meet. You can be truly known because you finally exist as a distinct self with real preferences, real edges, real opinions that don't dissolve the moment someone disagrees. The intimacy of Phase 3 is the intimacy Jung pointed toward when he described genuine relationship. Two whole people meeting, each transformed by the contact, but neither one disappearing into the other. This is also the phase where you understand, finally, the difference between empathy and merging, and you'll feel almost embarrassed that you couldn't see it for so long. Merging means feeling someone's pain as your own and losing yourself in it. Empathy means feeling someone's pain while remaining yourself, present with them but not consumed. The merged empath has to fix your feelings because your feelings have become their emergency. The sovereign empath can be fully present to your pain without needing to make it stop, because it isn't their pain, and they trust you to move through it. That trust is one of the deepest forms of respect one person can offer another. The merged version couldn't give it, because merging can't tell where one person ends and the next begins. There's a discernment that arrives in Phase 3 that the wall builders of failed Phase 2 never reach. Because you have a self now, you can afford to be open. The wall was only ever necessary when there was nothing inside to protect, when a single strong feeling from another person could flood the empty center and take you over. Once the center is occupied by an actual sovereign self, you don't need the wall anymore. You can open the door and close it as the situation calls for. Your safety no longer depends on keeping everyone out, because you're no longer at risk of vanishing. You can be enormously open precisely because you're no longer boundless. I want to be honest about Phase 3 though, because the spiritual marketplace loves to sell it as a permanent state of bliss, and Jung would never have promised you that. The return isn't a final destination where you arrive and stay forever, glowing with serenity. Individuation is a lifelong process, not a trophy. There will still be days when an old person from the merge era pulls you back into caretaking before you catch yourself. There will still be moments when someone's grief slips under your guard and you carry it further than you meant to. The difference is that now you notice. Now you have a self that registers the slip and can choose to correct it. The dial can drift, but your hand is never far from it. And Phase 3 has its own particular loneliness, which no one warns you about. Because you've changed so completely, you often find that you've outgrown people who can only relate through the old ways. There are those in your life who only knew how to connect with you through the merge, who needed you formless and available and endlessly absorbing, and some of them simply cannot meet the person you've become. They keep reaching for the mirror, and the mirror isn't there anymore. Where a whole person now stands, they find nothing they know how to hold, and they drift away. You grieve those people, but it's a different grief than the collapse. In Phase 2, losing people felt like being torn apart because you weren't whole enough to survive the tearing. In Phase 3, it's the clean sadness of an ending you understand and can bear. You can wish someone well and still let them go. You have enough self to hold your own sorrow without being destroyed by it. That, more than anything, is the mark of the return. You can feel the full weight of a loss and remain standing inside your own life. The empath in phase 3 often finds their way to a strange and hard-won peace with the whole journey. They look back at phase 1, the merge, and they feel tenderness toward the child who turned the dial up to survive. That child was brilliant. That radar kept them safe in an unsafe world, and it deserves gratitude, not contempt. They look back at phase 2, the collapse, and they recognize it for what it was, not a breakdown, but the necessary demolition that cleared the ground. And they stand in phase 3, understanding that they couldn't have skipped a single step. The sovereignty they have now was only reachable by walking straight through the fire that nearly ended them. Jung believed the ultimate task of a human life was to become whole, which meant integrating everything you'd rejected and split off, holding the opposites together in one person. For the empath, wholeness means holding two things at once that used to feel like enemies: deep sensitivity and firm boundaries, profound openness and a solid, unmovable center, the capacity to feel everything and the sovereignty to choose what you do with it. In phase 1, you had the sensitivity without the self. In failed phase 2, some tried to grab the self by killing the sensitivity. Only in phase 3 do you get both, the feeling and the sovereignty, married inside one whole person. That marriage is what the entire empath journey was always moving toward. The merge was the sensitivity searching for a self. The collapse was the self being violently born. The return is the moment they finally meet and become one thing. Let me pull all of this together because there's a reason these phases can only happen in this order, and understanding it might give you patience with wherever you are right now. You cannot go directly from the merge to sovereignty. There's no shortcut across the middle. This is the thing every impatient seeker wants to believe, that with enough books, enough practices, enough insight, you can leap from being a boundaryless caretaker straight to being a whole, sovereign, discerning empath, and skip the terrible emptiness in between. It doesn't work. It has never worked. The reason is simple, and it's the most important thing Jung understood about transformation. The false self has to die before the true self can live, and death is not a concept you can think your way through. It's an experience you have to survive. The merge isn't a bad habit you can decide to drop. It's an entire structure of survival, woven into your nervous system before you had words, and it can only come apart through a real collapse, a lived, felt, terrifying dissolution. Phase 2 isn't an unfortunate detour on the way to phase 3. Phase 2 is the doorway. There's no other door. This is why the pain of the collapse means something so different from what it feels like. When you're inside it, every instinct screams that something has gone catastrophically wrong, that you're broken, that you've lost everything, that you'll never feel whole again. But if you understand the architecture of the journey, you can hold a second truth alongside the pain. The collapse is only happening because a self is trying to be born. Your psyche does not initiate this demolition in people who lack the strength to rebuild. The very fact that your old life is coming apart is evidence that something in you is ready for what comes next. Jung watched people stand right at the threshold of this transformation and turn back, again and again, and he considered it one of the quiet tragedies of human life. They felt the collapse begin, felt the merge failing, felt the terrifying emptiness of the gap, and they panicked, and they ran back to a life that was slowly suffocating them, because at least suffocation was familiar. They chose the known death over the unknown life, and Jung understood exactly why they did it. The gap is unbearable. Standing in the emptiness without rushing to fill it may be the single hardest thing a human being is ever asked to do. But that's also where the whole thing turns. The people who can tolerate the gap, who can sit in the formlessness a little longer, Resist the urge to grab the first new identity that promises to end the discomfort, and let something authentic slowly emerge from the emptiness rather than forcing it. Those are the ones who cross into phase 3. It isn't strength that gets them across, not in the ordinary sense. It's the willingness to not know for longer than feels survivable, to be nobody for a while, to let the old self stay dead long enough for the real one to find its footing. If you're the kind of empath who has read this far and felt each phase land in your body like a memory, then you already know this journey isn't theoretical for you. You've lived at least the first 2. And if you're in the thick of the second one right now, in the numbness or the emptiness or the wreckage of relationships that couldn't survive your becoming real, I want you to know that everything you're feeling is not the end of your story. It's the middle. It's the hardest middle there is. And the reason it's the hardest is that it's the most important. There's a strange symmetry to this whole journey that only becomes visible from phase 3. In phase 1, you walked into every room and lost yourself in it. You dissolved. The dial was jammed on high, and you drowned in everyone. You were completely open and completely without a self. In phase 3, you walk into that same room, and you can feel everything you always could. The tension, the sadness, the unspoken currents moving between people. Nothing about your sensitivity has diminished. If anything, it's sharper now because it's clean, no longer tangled up with your own panic. You feel it all. And this time, you stay. That's the whole journey in a single image. The empath who once lost themselves in every room learns, finally, to be in the room without disappearing, to feel everything and remain someone, to open the door all the way and still know exactly where they stand. The sensitivity was never the problem. It was always the gift it appeared to be in phase 1. It just had no owner. The entire arc of the 3 phases is the story of that gift finding its way home to a self that can finally hold it. Jung would tell you that this is what individuation looks like in the specific life of a sensitive person. It's the slow, painful, irreversible work of becoming someone who can feel the whole weight of the world and carry it consciously, by choice, without being crushed. The merged empath was crushed constantly and called it love. The wall builder refused to feel and called it peace. The sovereign empath feels it all, chooses their response, and calls it, simply, being fully alive. You didn't choose to be born with the dial turned all the way up. That was never in your hands. But whether you spend your life drowning in everyone else's weather, or hiding behind a wall from a world that once overwhelmed you, or finally standing in the middle of it all with your hands steady on your own controls, that part is being decided right now, in whatever phase you're living. The empaths who make it to the 3rd phase aren't the ones who suffered least. Often they're the ones who suffered most in phase 2, precisely because they refused to run back to the merge and refused to hide behind a wall. They stayed in the fire until the fire made them whole. So if the ground has gone out from under you, if the people are falling away, if you can't feel anything or you can't stop feeling everything, if you have no idea who you are anymore, consider the possibility that you're not losing yourself. You're between selves. You're in the doorway. And the only thing the doorway asks of you is that you don't turn back. Something is being born in you that could never have existed while the old self was still running the show. It doesn't look like anything yet. It has no shape, no name, no clear direction. But it's there, in the same way the whole tree is already there inside a seed that's been split open in the dark. The splitting hurts. It's supposed to. There is no coming to consciousness without it. And on the other side of the dark is a version of you who finally gets to feel this vivid, sensitive, overwhelming life on your own terms, with your own hands on your own dial, at last. If you're standing in that doorway right now, and you're looking for something to hold while the ground finds its shape again, Our guide, True Self-Discovery, was built for exactly this passage. 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's map of the psyche, designed to help you meet yourself in the emptiness instead of fleeing it, and to walk with you from the collapse toward the return. It won't rush you. Nothing worth becoming can be rushed, but it can keep you company while the real you slowly comes home. You'll find it linked below.